The previous basket is under review.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of the Basket Under Review podcast. I'm your host, Eamonn Brennan of EamonnBrennan.com. My newsletter, Buzzer, is available there. I am here with a fellow member of the Basket Under Review crew, Kevin Sweeney, most recently seen in a Jeopardy episode that was, I have to say, a bit of a scam of a win for me, but I still took it. I didn't walk it back. I took it. Kevin's been doing some really interesting stuff. We're going to get to him in a second. Really quickly want to mention our sponsor, Homefield, the single best place in the world to get college athletics apparel. Very happy that Homefield is sponsoring the show. They've been doing their can't miss kickoff every week leading up to the college football season. New drops, hats, shirts, jackets, all kinds of stuff. They recently opened a retail store in Bloomington, Indiana, which is pretty cool. Proper like brick and mortar store. So shout out Homefield. Thank you for sponsoring. Go check out homefieldapparel.com. Tell them we sent you, even though it doesn't matter, and that's not how the sponsorship works. I just really like saying that on the podcast every time, and eventually someone will get annoyed with me and make me stop. Okay, Kevin, thank you for being here. You have been doing some fantastic work on Basket Under Review on the Scout Team episodes with Eric Fawcett, breaking down trends and tactical stuff in college basketball. This is something I feel like I covered. You're much younger than me, but this is something I feel like I covered early in my career. I really tried to, right? Like I gave it a go and just found like I wasn't as good at it as other college basketball reporters. Like it's just not like I couldn't be a coach. You know what I mean? Like I'm just not good at it. And so I'm always really interested to talk to people who are really diving into this stuff, right? Like really dialing in on the interesting X's and O's stuff. And your Scout Team stuff's been good. And I wanted to talk to you kind of about the big trends that we're going to see in college basketball in 2025-26. So thank you for being on the show. How are you doing? How's it going in Chicago? What's up?
I'm great. You know, Chicago in the summer, as you know, is pretty hard to beat. So I've been enjoying that.
It's the best.
But yeah, squeezing in some film dives here and there with Fawcett, who I do have to shout out. He is unbelievable. I've said it to some other people before, but like I don't think there is a smarter X and O mind who is not currently like full-time employed by a basketball team at some level than Eric Fawcett. He's just a monster and helps cover a lot of things that I don't see, or helps put me on the path to see stuff that I probably should have seen. I've learned a lot from doing stuff with him, and what a great resource for everybody in the Basket Under Review family to have. In having him, and in the Discord, I mean, he's in there all the time, especially during the year. So if you're a fan, you see something you don't understand what it is, or you want to see a clearer picture of it, he's there. So huge shout out to him.
Yeah, the market for analysis of specific X's and O's, I feel like, is relatively niche, but there are a ton within college basketball fandom. There are a ton of people who are like really interested and want to understand what they're seeing, and I do feel like one of the great things about college basketball is that, look, I watch the NBA. I like the NBA. I think the NBA is great, right? Like, I'm not one of these college fans who's like, they don't play defense, whatever. Like, I'm in on the NBA. I watch it every year. I watch the Bulls be terrible every time I can when they come visit the Wizards, all that good stuff. But I do think there's a stylistic diversity in college basketball and an X's and O's sort of tactical diversity that you don't quite get in the NBA, because everyone kind of not totally, but everyone kind of plays the same pace, right? Like everyone kind of runs similar stuff. There's a lot of similar sets in the NBA, to the point where I think some NBA fans have started to complain like, this is a little homogenized now. Like everyone's kind of doing the same thing. Whereas in college basketball, you can get a big raft of different styles that can work. You can play super slow and be effective. You can play fast and be effective. And I do think college in the last 5, 6, 7, I don't know where you'd peg it at, but like the last 5, 6, 7 years has started to develop more into adopting more NBA type stuff. So that's a big picture thing. But like, what are the specific things that you and Eric, particularly in the ones that you were talking about, you talked about in July, X's and O's trends taking over college basketball? What are the big things that people are doing now that are different from, let's say, 5, 6 years, 7 years ago, that are shaping what people see when they're watching the games, even if they're not super aware of it.
Look, I think your lead-in was really interesting. It makes me think of something I read, and I'm blanking on who said it, so I apologize. But they were talking about baseball and like the analytics revolution, and how essentially like if everybody's using the same analytical inputs and everybody values players pretty similarly, then like you stop having a lot of diversity of team building style. If everybody thinks this is the optimized way, and I'm not saying the NBA is quite there, but I think you get tastes of that, right? Like I think the NBA has gotten to a point where like it's almost too smart for its own good. For better or worse, college basketball probably isn't as smart as the NBA just yet.
Right.
And I also think because there's differences in just personality and differences in budget and like there's such a wide swath in college basketball of like what you can do to build a successful team. I think it becomes a really fun proving ground for different styles to either take hold or not. I do think, as you said, that there is, there are some clear kind of undercurrents of like, all right, this is what the NBA is doing or this is what Europe's doing. And I think a lot of college coaches are very aware of that stuff and spend a lot of time studying that stuff. But, I think the college game is still different. I think probably most importantly, I think the college game is still very much more a physicality and offensive rebounding focused sport than the NBA is, partially because teams aren't as efficient in transition, so you can push numbers to the glass a little bit more. But I really think that's been, in a lot of ways, a big undercurrent of the rise of or re-emergence of these two big offenses, right? And Florida's probably the example we've talked about most on the show, partially because they're the national champions, partially because they've kind of ruthlessly optimized the Gonzaga model or the Arizona Tommy Lloyd model of like, how can you be really efficient and also be really big and maybe not absurdly skilled at every spot. But I think probably biggest picture offensively in my eyes, this like swing back towards two bigs has been huge. And, we saw it last year with a lot of the best teams, whether it was Florida or Auburn or Houston played big a lot, really throughout the sport, even, a Michigan that played a 7-footer as sort of a pseudo point guard. You see more teams finding creative ways to use multiple big bodies. And I think you're going to continue to see more of that. It's challenging because bigs are in short supply, obviously. It's not easy to find them, and they're very expensive to get them. But I think Florida in particular kind of proved, like if you have a stable of these guys and you can wear people out on the interior and generate a ton of extra possessions on the offensive glass, you raise your floor pretty significantly. And then, all right, now we can address the ceiling with our backcourt. And Florida happened to strike gold by having maybe the best point guard in the country in Walter Clayton.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think it's been interesting to see teams, because we were in a phase, even as recent as like a couple years ago, where you did have kind of the NBA has now, on a 5-year lag or whatever, filtered down, and bigs got to be able to shoot. You got to stretch the floor. Like I remember when Mike Woodson became the coach and Trace Jackson Davis, decided to stay, and it was this huge deal. And he was talking about, like Coach Woodson's going to develop me as a perimeter player so I can go to the NBA or whatever. And it never really happened. He just ended up being an awesome 5'4" kind of, but like a handoff guy at the perimeter. And that helped him more with the NBA stuff than I think that him hitting 33s in a season would have. You know what I mean? Like there is a value to being big, running at the rim, getting a bunch of offensive and defensive rebounds, and being athletic enough to, if you're a 4, you don't necessarily have to shoot the ball super well, but you do have to be able to defend 2-3 guys, right? Like on the floor at any given time. And it does feel like Florida kind of cracked that code last year of, when we go super big, we're not going to be the most dynamic offensive team. Obviously, we have Walter Clayton, so that solves a lot of problems for us in the backcourt. We have these great guards, et cetera, et cetera. But we can sacrifice in the front court on the offensive end. We don't need to stretch the floor in the same way that teams, I think, even like a year or two ago, kind of thought they had to as a rule moving forward at the very high levels of the sport.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think what's probably become the more important thing than like, oh, can your 4 or your 5 make 33s in a season? What's more become important is like, are your 4s and 5s able to process the game quick enough and understand how to play in space, understand how to move without the basketball, understand how to play in handoffs and things like that, right? Like the the idea of having like a 7-foot dude who has zero feel for the game and doesn't know what he's doing out there, yeah, that's going to ruin your spacing. Like
but he can stroke it.
Right.
But he can hit threes. Yeah.
The best and most, I think, compelling offenses that I watch in college basketball now do the best job of involving their non-shooters in the offense and not allowing them to destroy their spacing. Like Florida let Alex Condon do a whole lot. Alex Condon's not a great three-point shooter. He'd made enough of them to keep you honest. But his importance to the Florida offense was not necessarily like, oh man, Condon's going to spray it from beyond the arc. It was, you could use Condon in handoffs. You could use him as like a high, short roll initiator, playmaker. It was that he could move without the basketball. It's that he could play in the dunker and get offensive rebounds and crash the glass. Like he did a whole lot. And even Chinyelu, who is like as low skill as they come offensively, still had a really valuable asset. And we highlighted this in the first scout team video, the seals and, the Gortat screens, which I think is maybe the more official basketball term for it. Like they're just ridiculous. And quite frankly, refs don't call fouls on it. Like you have unbelievable flexibility right now as a college basketball big man to just throw your body around the basket and like clear bodies out of the way. And no one's better at doing that than Chinyelu. So spacing and those types of concepts are huge, right? Like we don't need to get away from that. I just think we've gotten to a point where now just being able to shoot is not like the all-powerful skill. And there's a lot of different ways you can use unique players and have success in college basketball.
Yeah, and I think we saw that in the portal a little bit this year, right? Like shooters are still, I don't know what the premium, I think you had a really good idea on the Discord, a few weeks back of like, it would be really useful for college coaches to understand the price premium between different positions, right? Because there's a lot of guards out there who can fill it up. Maybe not as many big guys who can do Gortat screens, which I think the idea that Marcin Gortat has a basketball move named after him is fantastic. But there are differences in the portal in terms of like supply and demand, right? Like there's a lot of guys who are available, but not quite as, like a guy who, scores 20 points he's like 6'2", scores 20 points in, the SoCon or whatever. No disrespect to the SoCon. This is a random off the top of my head. SoCon fans, please don't get mad at me. Versus like a guy who's like 6'11" and can move, right? And can get around the floor a little bit. There's a huge difference. And I think you're starting to see that a little bit in the portal in a way that I think 2-3 years ago, it was just, we need to space the floor. We need shooters. Right. And I think that has changed a little bit. And coaches have gotten a little bit more tactical about how they're building their roster, in that they're not like obsessed with a 3 who can shoot, a 4 who can shoot, whatever, even though you still need those guys and you have to be able to space the floor.
Yeah. I think what I would say, and this is where I think it's, X's and O's and roster construction sort of interact, and that's where it's been fun for me in Fawcett, because I think I'm probably the roster construction guru and he's the X and O guy, right? Is like there are skill sets that your program will value more than other programs, right? Like if you are Nate Oates' team, like you probably value shooting a little bit more than Tom Izzo, right? Like maybe your value on each individual player is different. But like there are certain roles that are easier to find, like the scoring combo guard you mentioned. Like that's not the spot I'm probably breaking the bank. Like if I'm operating under a budget, whether it's 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, 15 million, right? Like I don't want to what is the difference in wins above replacement, let's say, between the best scoring combo guard on the board and the 25th best? And if the gap between those is different, than it is much smaller than the gap in our minds between the best 5 and the worst, the 25th best 5, like, all right, like that's a real conversation we need to start thinking about. So, again, I think that's where we're becoming a little bit more professionalized, right? Like, the staffs have more distinctions within them. You have guys who are focused on X and O's, guys who are focused on recruiting, guys who are in GM type roles. I think that's all sort of the next evolution. But does that create maybe a slightly more homogenized sport? Possibly. But I do think that each program will have different things that they value, and because of that, the smartest ones will be able to see a better value in certain guys in the portal than others, and they'll win the 2020s or the 2030s of college hoops. And those that struggle with that, I think, I'm not going to say they're getting left behind. I think there's a lot of, this coach is not cut out for this era. And like, Usually that guy has like gotten a 5 seed in the last like year or two, and I'm not ready to write him off yet. But like,
Right.
I think like again, we'll use Florida as the model. Like Florida has done an outstanding job of recruiting players that fit the system that they want to play, having a system that like largely works analytically without being like so rigid that it stops players from being able to just go play, and then having a little luck, which you need in the NCAA tournament to cut down the nets.
Okay, so tell me about the ball screen defense trend in Europe that coaches are looking at, because you guys mentioned this in the video, and I think it's really interesting because ball screen defense and ball screen offense are huge pivot points in basketball these days. Like it's just every NBA team, every college team, every European team is running ball screens. Again, there's more stylistic diversity, but there's just still a ton of ball screens all the time. So what is a defensive change we might see that might make everyone go, oh, this is a new way to guard this?
Yeah, so I think biggest picture, it's probably a return to more aggressive ball screen coverages.
Like icing it?
I think you'll see some icing. I think you'll see some more hedging. I think big picture, like the days of just like sitting back in deep drop, the last couple of years, a lot of teams have built around that. I'm not going to say that's over, because I think some staffs will still use that, or they'll have a player like a Ryan Kalkbrenner, or a true Charles Bediako a couple years ago for Alabama was a great example of this. I think there's a few different ways and few different defenses. BYU hired a guy by the name of Will Voigt last year, who does he's known for quote unquote peel switching. There's plenty of videos about that. The hedge and plug is what we discussed on the video, which is probably not easily explained by me, but I would encourage everyone to check it out. Fawcett does a much better job.
The whole part of the point of this is go watch the video for a more in-depth discussion.
The video is great, and again, there's others who do a great job of it as well. But Tomas Iusalo, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right, he is now the head coach of the Grizzlies, but he was coaching in Europe, and that defense has completely taken over Europe. Again, like the root of it is essentially, how can we force the ball early out of a high-level ball handler's hands and then recover back pretty quickly, right? I think the days of just letting these point guards step into 18-footers is probably dwindling. And part of that, I think, is that point guard play in college basketball is a lot better than it was 3-4 years ago when everybody wanted to play in drop coverage.
Right. And the best point guards tend to filter up. Like I made, that flippant comment about the guy who scored 20 points in the SoCon or whatever, but like those guys show up in high major programs now, and the talent filters up at a level that it did before, but not quite to the same degree with the same frequency. Okay, so I'm curious, who are the programs that are running the most interesting stuff? Doesn't have to be high paced or spacing the floor. It can be, but there's a huge stylistic diversity in college basketball. You can win playing many different styles in college basketball, which I think is a very positive thing for the sport. I think, Drake and now Iowa with Ben McCollum is a great example of that, of like, we can be super slow, but we're also kind of playing like NBA point guard dominated offense type stuff. Who do you think are the most interesting programs or staffs doing, X's and O's right now? Like what are the things that fans, that when they watch College Game Day on a random Saturday in February, are going to be like, oh, I already know about this?
Yeah, I think the Iowa one is probably the most fascinating conversation, just because of the pace, and also because Ben McCollum's offenses and some of their principles have been being studied for a while. By a lot of
he's
really
like a big coaches guy. Like
coaches
before he got the job at Drake, he was like, every coach was like, have you seen this guy Ben McCollum in D2 or whatever? Like he's the best. And then he immediately was successful in D1, and people are just like, you see, I told you so.
Like Grant McCaslin, who's at Texas Tech now, when he was at North Texas, he built his defense based on Mark Adams' no middle at Texas Tech. And he went to Northwest Missouri State and built their offense around Ben McCollum's. And since he's gotten to Tech, he's sped things up. They play faster now. They're not, dragging the pace the way that North Texas was under Grant. But, I think it'll be interesting to see, does Ben do something similar? And knowing how close those two are, I would bet that long term, that's somewhere they go. Now, in year one with Sturts, do they grind things out? I would guess it's probably closer to, I don't know if they'll be the slowest team in the country, but I'd guess it's maybe closer to Tony Bennett ball than where Texas Tech was last year, which was pretty fast and up and down.
Right.
I do think Kentucky, what they do X and O's wise, is pretty impressive, and probably some of the higher level stuff you'll see. It's funny. I was at the Combine and the G League camp in Chicago in May, and Kentucky's basically whole team was there because Kentucky's whole starting lineup was senior transfers that were not quite good enough for the NBA, but like kind of knocking on the door. Right. And I remember sitting there like watching these guys play against the other like fringe NBA prospects and being incredibly underwhelmed. I thought to myself as I'm watching that, like, how did this team got a 3 seed last year? Like, these guys got a 3 seed and like won so many high level games, and it made me think a little bit about like, where does Mark Pope get Kentucky if he gets the dudes, right? If he gets the high level players, and it's not just as simple as that, right? Like, last year's group had clearly like an incredible bond and culture and chemistry that may be different this year and whatnot. But like, by all accounts, Kentucky has upgraded its athleticism, upgraded its talent level. They still have Otega Owe. I do think schematically they're on the front edge of the sport, and they're going to also have the resources to go get elite players. And I think BYU is probably similarly in that category, right? Like, if you're going to have this monster player acquisition machine behind you and you have a coach that clearly is pretty sharp on the X&O front, I think that's a pretty potent combo that has a chance to be scary.
Yeah, very interesting that the two most recent BYU coaches are the two topics of conversation there. But I mean, not wrongly, like, Mark Pope ran amazing stuff at BYU. They were consistently one of the most entertaining teams to watch in college basketball. And I think for like old school fans too, like, you don't have to be a huge hoops X's and O's addict to just watch them play and see the flow and see the spacing and see back cuts and kind of be, oh yeah, this is a really cool team. And I think he recreated that at Kentucky last year with some caveats, but for the most part, like, it was a pretty similar deal. And I agree on BYU. Like, I think their transition last year from being kind of like early season warts, whatever, into like, frankly, kind of a machine by the end of the year was really impressive. And I think Kevin Young did a fantastic job there. And I think they have a ton of money behind the program. And if you have a competent person and staff in charge of that program, and you can coordinate with the people putting the money up, you're in a really, really good position. Okay, so I want to talk to you. We've done the X's and O's thing. I do want to go broad, right, and talk about sort of like storylines for the season we're interested in. I thought your piece on SI previewing the 2025-26 season was really good and comprehensive. And you mentioned in it that Michigan, alongside Louisville, shout out Louisville, who has like the best backcourt in the country, basically, at least offensively. I don't know about defensively, might be a slightly different story, but they're going to score a ton of points. You said Michigan was, from what you'd heard, the most prepared program for this year's iteration of NIL, and it does seem to change every year of like what coaches are doing, what they're thinking about. Why do you think that was? Like, why were they prepared, and what do you make of this Michigan roster and just the program?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're in great shape with Dusty. I think they have one of the more competent staffs that he's put together, guys who have different expertises, guys who've worked at lower levels and understood how to find an edge, and now you're like supercharging that with Michigan resources and the Michigan brand, which I think really matters. On the NIL piece, I think what I would say is that no one was in any way, very few, were in any way prepared for what the market was going to look like this spring. Like, I would tell you, two of the smartest staffs, in my mind, in the country are Illinois and Florida. I would tell you that on March 1st, from what I had been told, both schools were thinking like, yeah, like, $5 million budget would be like pretty competitive right now. Like $5 million will get us in the game. It's probably not going to be at the top, but $5 million will like keep us in the conversation.
Wrong.
And
Wrong.
That was nowhere close. Like both I believe are north of 10
right.
for where they ended up. Illinois might have been closer to 10 than Florida, and Florida obviously paid sort of a national champion tax. Like there's things that happen along the way. Basically, the market was 50%, 100% higher basically than almost anyone expected, and so. Yeah. That meant that a lot of schools kind of lowballed guys that they were recruiting, and Michigan and Louisville were ready to pay what it took. Whether that was an administration thing, a Dusty thing, a Kelsey thing, like I don't know the details of that necessarily, but like people were balking at like, man, could we really pay over $1 million for Morez Johnson? And Michigan was like, yeah, we're doing that. Like, can you really pay like $2 to $3 million for Yaxel Lendeborg and be willing to like ride the wave with him through the draft process? a lot of people were like, that could be like half our budget. Michigan was like, no, we're doing that. Like, we're ready to go. And like, yeah, it helps to have relationships, and old school recruiting still matters. But some of the new school stuff and the willingness to stick your neck out and like kind of set the market a little bit was huge, I think, for both of them. And there's a reason that they're in the preseason top 10. And I think it's deserved. Their rosters are really, really strong. And they were ready to hit it. We'll see if the evals hit. I know people are very skeptical of the Elliott Cadeau thing. I think probably in fair terms. Like, I think Cadeau's struggles at Carolina last year were not the only reason they were bad, but it was certainly one of them. Maybe Michigan doesn't have the year they expect, and it's because they took a swing on Cadeau and it didn't work. But I'd rather get the guys that I wanted to swing at and solve the problem from there, and that's what Michigan did.
There's a lot there. I mean, I think it doesn't surprise me with Louisville, right? Like, that's the pro sports team in a pretty large metropolitan area, right? Like, they are obsessed there, and there's plenty of people, maybe not Papa John anymore, but lots of other people who are willing to pony up for the program. Michigan does surprise me a little bit because you just think of them as being so football obsessed as a booster base, right? Like, they're just not traditionally as basketball oriented, but everything runs downhill. And if you have a charismatic and savvy guy at the top of the program who can sell boosters on like, hey, yeah, here's what we're going to do, blah, 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 then you have like a chance to go out and acquire some really good talent. I think the Cadeau thing is fascinating. Honestly, there's two things here. One, North Carolina spent $14 million on their roster this summer, which I saw and I've talked about on the podcast a few times. And I don't like, I feel bad because I don't want to like alienate North Carolina fans from listening to the show, but I just can't believe that, particularly because Cadeau got away, right? And I would be very curious to see a fly on the wall video of that meeting with Hubert where the number was, quoted to him and he's just like, no, man, like, it's not going to happen for you. Like, best of luck. Because you look elsewhere on their roster and you're kind of like, they could kind of use Elliott Cadeau. But if, Michigan's paying $1 gazillion for him, then you have to pivot and go in a different direction, which is fine too. But you come away looking at their roster, and this goes back to the sort of roster construction stuff I've been talking about all offseason, and just being like, it would be really nice to have visibility into what schools are spending on which guys, because it's a fascinating thing. And how you fill out a $14 million roster and end up with North Carolina, which they'll probably be like a top 20 team or whatever, they'll top 15, like fine, but not like, oh my God, these guys spent the most money in college basketball to get the best players and now they're here. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very interesting discussion because it's just not, it almost feels like we have to give Hubert one last crack at this, and then the execution didn't quite come off. You know what I mean?
So a few thoughts on that. Number one, certainly in college basketball, but I think at all sports recruiting, like, people love the problems that they didn't deal with, right? Like, I'm sure Hubert was sitting in the office, like, complaining about Elliott Cadeau all of last year, and so when Elliott Cadeau comes in and asks for north of $1 million, they're like, dude, like, we're not doing this. And
ain't gonna happen.
Like, we'll go deal with someone else's problems. Now, the issue is, if you're not really locked in on the market, or quite frankly, I don't think many people knew at the time when some of these conversations were happening, like, what the market would be like. I feel pretty, I'm going to say I'm 90% confident from the numbers I have been told by good sources that, like, North Carolina is paying more for Kyan Evans than they would have for Elliott Cadeau. And that's part of that's how you get to $14 million, right? Like,
right. I took a deep, Kevin can see on the call, I took a deep sigh
and
there.
I think Cadeau has big flaws, right? Like, he's not a great shooter. He's really small. You can hunt him defensively. Like, there are issues here. But the one thing that I did say, and I said this to someone at Michigan when they took Cadeau, was I'd rather him be the first piece of the puzzle than the last one, right? Mm-hmm. And I felt like last year in a lot of ways, North Carolina was stuck between two different visions for their program, which was like RJ Davis doing what RJ did the year before to lead them to a 1 seed and a bunch of role players around them, and then the quote-unquote point guard of the future in Elliott Cadeau, who needs to be on the ball because he doesn't play well without it. I think that was not the only reason Carolina failed. Their bigs were a huge problem. I don't think Hubert did the most to maximize the group that they had, but, Cadeau and RJ's inability to coexist was, I think, a huge problem. And I said to Michigan, I was like, look, like, if you're going to build around Cadeau, build around Cadeau. But if he's the last piece, it's going to get scary. And I think, to give them credit, like, this is a much more logical build around someone like Elliot Cadeau than what they had last year, right? What Carolina had last year for him, right? You have a absolute sniper in Amari Burnett. You have a big playmaker in Lendeborg who you can play as more of a natural four, but also allow him to go play with the ball in his hands at times, maybe invert some actions. You have athletic bigs. You have lob threats. Merez can fly to the rim. Mara's absolutely ginormous, and you can feed it to him. You have rim protection, which insulates Cadeau defensively. I still have my concerns because the film was not great last year, but I can see the vision a lot more clearly for Michigan with Elliot Cadeau than I saw the vision last year for what North Carolina was trying for Elliot Cadeau to be. And so I think maybe this ends up being a win-win. Maybe Carolina walks out of this and say, yeah, we paid a whole heck of a lot for Kyan Evans, but Kyan Evans is a great shooter, and he's really, really smart, and he can play with Trimble more effectively. And maybe Michigan says, man, we got one of the most talented point guards in the country, which Elliot Cadeau is, and we got the best version of him.
It's going to be very interesting to see how things go at North Carolina this year. Again, I've talked it to death on the pod already, have written about it a bunch. I find their roster and their roster construction to be fascinating, and I have now talked it to death to the point where we just have to wait for the season to start and see how good they actually are. Wanted to hit a couple more storylines with you. A team that I have not talked about at all this offseason is Purdue, even though I think they're going to be awesome. They're kind of like Houston in that you just sort of expect them to be awesome at this point. They bring players back, they retain, they don't get super involved in the portal, really. They're just like the level to which Matt Painter has gotten this program through the Zach Edey stuff, but also post Zach Edey is really impressive. I think anybody who pays close attention to college basketball will remember Painter. I think it was when he was a freshman, maybe a sophomore, Trey Kaufman-Renn. He was just like constantly talking about Trey Kaufman-Renn. Well, Zach Edey is, the 2-time Wooden Award winner or whatever. He was constantly, oh yeah, this guy's amazing. He's going to play, we're going to play 2 big lineups with him, which he never really did. Constantly, propping him up. And the payoff that you see now is he's going to be one of the best players in the country. He still has Braden Smith. It's just a really good team, and a team that I feel like we sort of take for granted, not quite in the same way as Houston because they made the national title game last year, but like Purdue is just going to be awesome. And I haven't seen like a single, maybe I just missed it, but a single like, hey, Purdue's going to be awesome piece yet that maybe we need to write.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say a few things. Number one, it's sort of remarkable to think about 2 years ago and the narrative around that group. It was sort of like, this is the chance to win a national championship at Purdue. And like, if it doesn't happen then, it's never going to happen. And right. I think I bought into it. I think a lot of people did. And like, I look up, 18 months later, I'm like, what an idiot I am. Like this team is like right back, and they have the pieces. I worry a little bit about, the lack of maybe traditional wings. Colvin and Heidi were like these bigger athletic guys that could guard multiple positions. They don't really have that. They have small guards and big bigs. Yeah. And I wonder, certain matchups, maybe that hurts them, especially defensively. But they should be much tougher on the interior than they were a year ago. That was a big problem. Oscar Clough from South Dakota State is kind of the perfect Purdue big. They're great at finding ways to get post looks for their bigs. He's a monster post scorer. And then Jacobson back healthy gives them the rim protection that they really lacked a year ago. So I think that's huge. Point guard play, you have coaching, you have star power. I do think that maybe the hype has gotten a little out of control for Omer Meyer, their freshman from Israel, who's like this super fun to watch point guard. Like, I don't think, he's getting too many like Yakashonas comparisons, which like, I think number one, people like really underestimate, the difficulty with which it is to be any freshman and do what Kasparis did a year ago, but also like, how does one be Kasparis Yakashonas when Braden Smith's also in the backcourt, right? Like
that's not going to happen. It's fine.
Right. He's going to make an impact on this team. Yeah. He is going to be awesome for them potentially in 26-27. But like, I want to temper the hype with him because the dynamic of 2 kind of elite ball screen guys, I just don't know that it works. And they've got the best one already in Braden Smith.
One interesting offseason storyline, again, a little bit under-discussed, at least since it happened. It was super discussed when it happened. Kevin Willard leaving Maryland for Villanova, which I think 5 years ago, I certainly, when the rumors were happening, I was kind of like, wait, is Maryland not like a better fit or just a better, like there's a ton of local talent, they have resources, blah, blah, blah. And then you think about revenue sharing and you think about, Villanova's ability to recruit in the Big East and the lack of competition with football. And you sort of understand. What do you make of, first of all, just that situation and his deciding to go there, right? Which felt like for Maryland fans, I think, induced a lot of status anxiety of, oh my God, maybe we're not the massive program that we've been told we are by, frankly, like a lot of national media over the last 15 years, whatever. But also sort of how he's put that roster together and what you expect from them.
Villanova's a better job for Kevin Willard. It doesn't necessarily make it a way better job in perpetuity. It's probably a better job in 2025 with rev share versus NIL. Like, there's a little bit more stability financially that you'll have. There's less fighting over football money versus basketball money. But like long term, I'm not convinced that these jobs are like two different tiers and you have to take one or the other. I think for Willard, a lot of it's like back to the Big East, a little less travel. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of reasons why you might prefer the one job or the other, but I don't think it's necessarily a referendum on the Maryland job.
Right. But people take it that way. They take it that way. It's like,
how do you not?
Our coach is so desperate to leave that he like went on strike like a European club soccer player and forced his way out of the club or whatever, where it's just, I agree with you. I don't think it's an actual referendum. And I think, them hiring Buzz pretty quickly thereafter shows that, right? Like that's a desirable job. He's a proven, coach who will give you at least some level of success, I think, kind of guaranteed, and he wanted to be there, and that's cool. I do understand if fans are like, oh my God, like we just got to the Sweet 16 and we're right there, and the minute that happens, our coach wants to leave. And I understand that, but I also think, living where I live now in the DMV and hearing from Maryland fans more commonly, I do think there's context there, right? He just, it's a Big East guy. Like, he was at Seton Hall for 8 years. He's a Northeast guy. If you've ever talked to Kevin Willard, he belongs in the Big East. Let's just put it that way.
1,000%. Look, the timing sucks. Like, there's no better way. Like, it sucks. I wish, like, looking back, if I could advise Kevin Willard on the whole situation, I would say, look, dude, like, you probably gotta say, like it would have been better for everyone if he had done a Will Wade and just said, yeah, guys, like, I'm going somewhere else, but like my mind is 1,000% on this game, and like right. I would believe him. I still would. Like, I don't think Kevin Willard like tanked the Florida game. They lost to Florida because Florida had a lot better players. Like, it's just reality. Of course. Yeah. But like, and I think what's unfortunate is I don't think Willard truly knew when he started kind of digging his heels in every press conference and every session that he was gone. I think it was a hard decision at one point, and eventually the decision kind of got made, and then it was just really awkward, and there was no way to fix it. And so, now I think if Buzz wins in year one at Maryland, everybody will forget about it. And if Kevin wins at Villanova, like, great, cool. And they both probably will. Like, I question both guys as like ceiling, like are either of them delivering a Final Four to their new institution? I'm probably skeptical of that. I'm certainly skeptical of the Villanova roster this year, but they will probably win a lot of basketball games because they have long track records of doing so.
Did want to talk to you about Indiana. I have brought up Indiana on this podcast a few times in the roster construction adjacent conversation. Money spend aside, can you give Indiana fans an idea of what they want to expect? Because a lot of the discussion that I've seen anyway among Indiana fans is like DeVries is bringing in hard-nosed guys who, cut their teeth in the mid-majors and now they're ready to play hard for Indiana. And I feel like that short sells the tactical idea there. I feel like their front court is maybe not like they're one piece shot in the front court. But what do you make of them in the context of his sort of previous, like how Drake played, how West Virginia played? What do you make of how Indiana's roster looks and how he's going to employ it?
Yeah, look, I think it's a roster that like at least makes some logical sense in how it came together. As you said, like I don't love the front court situation. I think Reed Bailey was maybe the hardest player for me to evaluate among like top tier portal guys because I watched him a lot at Davidson. I watched him in person when they came up and played at Loyola. He's so skilled, and he's really, really hard to guard, but I just don't know if he's a 5, like especially defensively in the Big Ten. And I know the Big Ten centers
too is a different,
right.
It's a
and
different
it's
story.
it's not what it used to be. It's not Edie and every other 7'4" dude, but like
right.
he's gonna have to guard Tomislav Ivicic and Morez Johnson, and you go through this league, Nate Biddle and Clough and Kaufman-Renn, and there's a lot of good bigs in this league, and it'll be challenging, I think, defensively for them. But like I think offensively, the idea of a point guard in Taden Conaway, who's a great on-ball defender, one of the best in the country, who doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands a ton, like he's not a super high usage guy, paired with 2 wings who can really play make in Tucker DeVries, who is functionally Drake's point guard his last year at Drake, and then Lamar Wilkerson, who was their biggest portal expenditure and a huge investment, a guy I think that has a chance to be really good, just a big time scorer, shooter. I think that makes sense. I think Indiana will. I don't think they'll be explosive offensively, but I think they'll take the right shots. They'll be really disciplined offensively. I think they'll take care of the ball. I think they have the shooting around those guys to really help them. And I think a lot of it just like, can they generate enough easy stuff at the rim? Do they have enough like wiggle offensively, especially if you're not going to really post score at all? I think that's probably where I worry. But, I think making the tournament with this group is a reasonable goal. I don't know if I would be dreaming of much more than that, but
right.
I think if you're 35th and you're competent and you get into the tournament relatively comfortably, you're in that 8-9 game or something, that's a solid first year, and we build it from there.
I do think that make the tournament or thereabouts. I think the number one thing maybe that Indiana fans are looking for is like visible displays of competence and like tactical understanding in a way that, all due respect, Mike Woodson did not deliver. Like he did really well in the transfer portal. He retained really well when he took the job, but I don't think he ever made Indiana fans feel like he was the smartest guy in Assembly Hall. And I think that that's just knowing the culture of those fans as I do feel like that is the number one thing. Is just they were all raised on Bob Knight, and they all, for all of his flaws, Bob Knight was the smartest individual in Assembly Hall pretty much every time he walked onto the court, and that just hasn't been the case for a minute. And I think that's the number one like expectation for Indiana fans, and we'll see how it goes. But I think if they get back to, we're not the best team, we're not the most talented team, but we do the right stuff, we make the right plays, we make smart decisions, the ball moves, like people will be happier than I think maybe even they realize right now. Okay, one thing real quick before we go. You did a video about UCLA and Donovan Dent. I'm super interested in UCLA, just as like a Mick Cronin big picture discussion, because I feel like, I think when he got the job, he was extremely happy. He seemed super happy. He obviously, has had success there and done well. I think since the realignment stuff, he's maybe a little bit like, why am I moved to LA for a reason. I want to be like in a convertible when it's 85 degrees outside. I don't really want to go to West Lafayette in February. Why am I doing this? And so I wonder, Donovan Dent is like the second best point guard in the transfer portal this year behind Bennett Sturtz, do you think? Like, I mean,
probably fair, yeah.
Like,
I don't know, it doesn't even count Sturtz as a point guard, because, or as a portal player, excuse me, because he was never like
he doesn't really count.
Right, like there was no recruitment,
kind of like
and Sturtz was going to Iowa.
Kind of like Tucker DeVries, which if, Indiana had landed him in the transfer portal, independent of his dad being the coach, would have been like the biggest deal of all time. But Dent is a fantastic player. And I don't know that like the college basketball fan who is showing up in November, doesn't follow the offseason stuff, is totally locked in on like how good he was last year. And so I'm curious kind of what you make of him at UCLA. Kind of feels like a slightly pivotal year for Cronin at UCLA, and how they adjust to allow him to be, like I think one of the best guards in the country.
The easy way of summarizing this is Donovan Dent was just the engine of 2 top 50 teams, one that won a tournament game like for the last 2 years. Like this is like if you rebranded New Mexico as Oklahoma, who was one spot above them in KenPom last year, this would be like a seismic transfer portal get. And I think because
Right.
he's still like a mid-major transfer, there's some level of skepticism that, look, I think he's an unbelievable player. He's as fast as you'll find. He's elite in transition. He's a great passer. I do think the fit is funky. That's basically the premise of the video that we made. Is that, I think I said at the end of the video, if you view the Donovan Dent portal recruitment in the lens, through the lens of like old school recruiting, it makes all the sense in the world. Like a SoCal kid who gets to go play for the biggest program and help them get back to stardom. Like, yeah, of course he's going to UCLA. Why would he go to Kentucky? Why would he go to Florida? Why would he go anywhere else? When you think about new school recruiting and like maximizing the fit, maximizing the dollar, like regionality is way less important. Yeah, it's a little weird that the biggest jet in the portal chose to go play for the coach who basically his entire career has played in the bottom 75 or so of tempo nationally and doesn't necessarily have the roster around him that fits quite the same. Like New Mexico had a run and jump big guy and Nelly Joseph to play in ball screens with them, and UCLA doesn't necessarily have that. Maybe Xavier Booker becomes that guy, but he has a lot of work to do. Bilodeau as the 4 is maybe a little clunky at times. He's really good, but is he a Donovan Dent pick and roll pairing? Probably not, right? So how does that all come together? If this marriage is going to work, it's probably going to take a little bit of push pull on both sides, right? Like Dent's going to have to learn how to settle down and run sets and play with a discipline that Richard Pitino never made him. And Mick's going to have to say, hey, we've got the fastest, most athletic dude on the floor. We probably should let this guy fly it up and down and live with, a turnover here, a mistake there, a lack of control, maybe a defensive possession that's no good because we flew it up the floor on one end and missed a jumper. Like,
I'm sure Mick won't mind that at all. I'm sure he'll totally accept that, and that'll be fine.
And I do wonder, like, how does the money play into this? Like Donovan Dent, by all reporting, was one of these like $3-ish million players in the portal. Does Mick have a different viewpoint of like this has to work? Like I can't treat you like every other player we have with kid gloves, like every other player I've ever coached. Like it just has to be different. And I think Mick's a smart enough coach to make some of those tweaks. He's won a whole lot of games because of it. But man, like, is there probably going to be a breaking point in like a really miserable press conference in December or January about this? Like, I almost guarantee it. And that's probably the fun of UCLA.
I will take that bet. And I think I'll take the over on angry sideline explosions. Now, in the background, he might be talking to him like, look, I'm going to get after you like every other player when the cameras are on, but come on, you're my guy. Don't worry about it. And sort of massage it that way. But I 100% think in, as early as mid-November, we will see an explosive Mick Cronin interchange with Donovan Dent. And it's going to be a fascinating thing because super talented coach, super talented player, but stylistically just a huge question. And we'll see how it goes. All right, last one before we go. Last year, I feel like was defined by the SEC and in particular sort of the dominance of the top 4 or 5 teams. Obviously, the SEC hadn't like a record-setting year, and people got mad about that, even though it was just factually correct. But the SEC was really, really good. And the top 4 teams in the sport and top like 5, 6, I guess, if you want to stretch it a little bit, were like just way better than everybody else. And we saw that play out in March. I'm wondering if you think we will have anything close to that this year. I mean, I think Houston is the likeliest candidate, obviously, but other than that, I'm kind of looking around at the landscape and thinking it could be like one of those years where Houston's going to be really good. I think Purdue's going to be really good, but there aren't so many teams that I'm like, okay, this is the number 1 seed, right? This is going to be a behemoth that we had last year with teams that I feel like going into the season, even we were like, all these, like Auburn's going to be really, really good, right? Like Duke's going to be awesome, etc. So what do you think about that? Like, is that just me not reading the tea leaves on certain teams, or do you feel like we're in for a little bit of a downshift there?
What happened last year in the SEC is going to be really, really hard to replicate. I think part of that is last year was sort of a perfect storm. You had incredible coaching meets great talent meets COVID year guys sticking around, And like pretty much all the really good teams in the SEC also kind of hit as high as their ceiling possibly could have been. Like we knew Auburn was going to be good. We didn't know they would be the best team in the country for most of the year. We thought Florida had a chance to take a next step. I don't think anyone last year was putting Florida down as their like preseason champion on August 18th or whatever it would be, right? So like I think that's part of it. I think the COVID year probably its impact probably hasn't been discussed quite enough, and how it allowed these high major teams to become as deep and as loaded as you could possibly be, just having a fifth class of players, especially if you have all the money in the world to go spend it. I do think that if you look kind of across the landscape right now, that teams are not as deep, they're not as proven as they were a year ago, even with all of the NIL dollars. And I also think that NIL money is spread out a little bit more evenly. There's almost no kind of high major have-nots anymore. There's a handful, but for the most part, like even the teams that didn't have money still spent like in that 5 to 7 range, and there's really good mid-major teams that spent a whole lot of money, and teams in the mid-major ranks that maybe aren't even going to be that good that spend a whole lot of money, right?
Wait,
like,
who are the high major have-nots right now? I was just as you said that I was thinking like Penn State.
Boston College is probably the most obvious one.
Yeah.
Penn State, I think, got stuck in a really difficult position. Like, again, sort of ties back to where we talked at the beginning of like, people weren't prepared for what they were going to have to spend. And I think there were a lot of schools that like went into the spring being like, yeah, we got our 3 or 4 million. That should keep us in the ballpark. And like some places could quickly raise the extra 4, or were willing to spend the extra 4 knowing that they would raise it throughout the year. And some people, you were tapped out. And like, Penn State, there's the undercurrent of like, we're trying to win a national championship in football. We spent every dollar. They were spending, even in the spring portal in football, they were spending big on players. Like, there just probably wasn't a whole lot of room to go drop a bag on a point guard, right? Which is unfortunate, but I think those are the choices people will make. But
a reflection of the traditional status of Penn State basketball relative to the football program over time. I'm sure no one was sending out any checks before NIL for Penn State football players. Of course, that never happened. But now you do get to see kind of the immediate translation of, look, hey, yeah, we'll support you, but we got bigger fish to fry over here.
And that's why I think a lot of people sort of desperately want the house settlement to have some teeth and whatnot. Is like, it would suck if you're essentially mired to you have no chance of ever climbing out at Penn State because everybody else in your league cares way more about basketball than you do. And if you've got 4 and everybody else has 6, that's okay. But if you've got 4 and everybody else has 14, like, good luck to you, buddy. And I think that's unfortunately what I think some of those quote unquote have-nots ran into.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a very interesting time in the sport, tactically, strategically, big picture, small picture. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Check out Kevin's work at SI, at Basket Under Review. He's doing fantastic scout team videos with Eric Fawcett. And yeah, thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you soon.